The empty dish. The chipped ceramic dish sat starkly empty in the stainless steel sink, a silent testament to a small but deeply felt betrayal. For Jane, it wasn't just about the missing pasticcio, its savory aroma and flaky crust she'd been anticipating all day. It was the principle of it, the casual disregard that had become a constant hum beneath the surface of her increasingly strained marriage. Jane was the anchor now, the sole provider. As an administrator for a bustling construction firm, her days were a relentless cycle of schedules, invoices, and demanding clients. She often returned to their small apartment in the evenings, her shoulders tight with exhaustion, her stomach growling. The thought of the leftover pasticcio, a small indulgence she'd deliberately saved, had been a tiny beacon of comfort in her weary mind. John, her husband, had once been a promising copywriter, his wordsmithing skills sharp and sought after. But the recent layoff had seemed to deflate him, leaving him adrift in a sea of half-finished personal projects, most notably a copywriting book that never seemed to progress beyond the initial chapters. While Jane juggled deadlines and budgets, John's days were filled with the quiet tapping of his keyboard, punctuated by long stretches of silence that felt less like focused work and more like avoidance. The sight of the empty dish ignited a familiar, simmering resentment. He hadn't just eaten her food, he hadn't even washed the plate. It was a small act, yet it amplified the growing chasm between them. Jane felt a surge of weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. She was tired of carrying the weight, tired of the unspoken expectation that she would always understand, always provide, always forgive the small, selfish acts that chipped away at her love. "He's just using you, Jane," her sister Lola had warned, her voice sharp with concern. And then there was Charles, her colleague, handsome, athletic, with a ready smile and eyes that lingered a moment too long. He saw her, truly saw her, and the unspoken connection between them offered a tantalizing glimpse of a different future, a future where she wasn't just a provider but cherished. That evening the dam finally broke. The words tumbled out, raw and laced with years of unspoken frustration. "I can't do this anymore, John," she'd said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "I want a divorce." John, caught off guard, had stammered and protested, but the resolute look in Jane's eyes silenced him. He moved out a few days later, the silence he left behind in the apartment feeling heavier than his presence ever had. In the weeks that followed, Jane found herself wrestling with a confusing mix of emotions. Relief warred with guilt, and the unfamiliar taste of freedom was tinged with a persistent ache. Her pastor, a kind and well-meaning man, urged her to reconsider. He reminded her of the early days of their relationship, of John's sacrifices when she was pursuing her own career advancement. "Marriage is about commitment, Jane," he'd said gently. "Things will get better. You need to have faith." But Jane's faith had waned, along with her attendance at church. The vibrant community she once found solace in now felt distant, a reminder of a life she no longer seemed to fit into. The allure of a fresh start, of a life where she could nurture the budding connection with Charles without the weight of a failing marriage, was too strong to ignore. Meanwhile, John found himself adrift. The silence of the empty apartment amplified his own sense of failure. He'd always envisioned himself as the provider, the successful writer supporting his wife. The layoff had been a blow, but Jane's unwavering support had initially been a comfort. He hadn't realized how his own inertia, his absorption in his own struggles, had blinded him to the immense pressure she was under. He'd taken her for granted, assuming her strength was inexhaustible. The empty dish, he now understood, was a symbol of his own emptiness, his own lack of consideration. One cool evening, a few weeks after John had moved out, there was a knock on his door. It was Lola, her expression a mix of sheepishness and concern. Her daughter Maya, a bright-eyed 10-year-old, stood beside her, clutching a half-eaten bag of chips. "John," Lola began, her voice hesitant, "there's something I need to tell you. About the pasticcio," Maya piped up, her cheeks slightly flushed. "Mommy and I ate it, Uncle John. It smelled so good. and Mommy said it was okay. But then Aunt Jane was really sad. Lola's face was etched with guilt. I didn't realize how much it meant to her. I just thought, well, there was plenty of food in the fridge. I didn't know she'd been looking forward to it all day. The revelation hit John like a physical blow. The empty dish, the catalyst for Jane's ultimatum, hadn't even been his fault. A wave of shame washed over him, compounded by a flicker of anger at Lola's carelessness. Just then, his phone rang. It was his pastor. "John, can you meet me at Jane's place? Her mother is here, and we thought maybe we could talk." Hope, fragile but persistent, bloomed in John's chest. He agreed, and soon found himself walking alongside his pastor and Jane's mother towards their old apartment. As they approached, a pizza delivery van pulled away from the curb. The front door was wide open, and through the gap, John's heart plummeted. Standing in the living room, wrapped in a towel, was Jane. A shirtless Charles was placing a pizza box on the coffee table. Scattered on the rug were articles of clothing, a discarded blouse, a lacy bra, a pair of her favorite jeans. The scene was a tableau of intimacy, a stark and undeniable confirmation of Jane's desire to move on. The air crackled with unspoken accusations and shattered hopes. On seeing them, Jane's face drained of color. She gasped, clutching the towel tighter, and fled into the bedroom, the click of the lock echoing in the stunned silence. The reconciliation meeting dissolved into awkward apologies and hurried departures. John walked away feeling numb, the fragile bud of hope crushed under the weight of reality. Life, however, had other plans. Weeks turned into months. John, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose and a burning desire to prove himself, threw himself into his writing. The layoff, the heartbreak, they became unexpected catalysts. His book proposal, once languishing, now pulsed with raw emotion and insightful observations. Then came the call that changed everything, a 6-figure book deal. Suddenly, John was no longer the unemployed husband. He was an author, his words finally finding their audience. The book launch was a whirlwind of interviews and congratulations. And then came the job offers, not one, but 3 major advertising agencies vying for his talent. A year later, the sharp edges of John's heartbreak had softened into a dull ache. He had found his footing, his career soaring. He still went to church every Sunday, a quiet ritual of gratitude and reflection. One Sunday, he saw Lola. She looked thinner, her usual vivacity dimmed. "John," she said, her voice subdued, "things haven't been so good for Jane and Charles." She explained how they had moved in together, only to both lose their jobs within a short span. Financial strain had taken its toll, and the initial spark of their romance had flickered under the pressure. A wave of unexpected empathy washed over John. He remembered the early days with Jane, the shared struggles and the unwavering belief in each other. Despite everything, he couldn't bear the thought of her suffering. He pulled out his checkbook. Without a word, he wrote out a check for $10,000 and handed it to his pastor. "Please," he said, his voice low, "give this to Jane. Tell her it's from an anonymous well-wisher, and promise me you won't tell her it was me. I want to send her this amount every month as long as she needs it." The pastor looked at him, his eyes filled with understanding and a hint of surprise. He nodded solemnly. "I promise, John." As John walked out of the church and into the bright afternoon sun, a complex tapestry of emotions swirled within him. There was no triumph, no vindication, just a quiet sense of closure, a strange mix of sadness and a selfless desire to ease the burden of the woman he had once loved, even if their paths had diverged so dramatically. The empty dish had led to a painful ending, but in its wake, an unexpected form of grace had begun to bloom.